Hello everyone. Today we will be taking up the yet another division of the plant kingdom, that is your Teradophytes. Now the Teradophytes, as they belong to cryptogamy, last day I told you, that means they are the seedless plants. They have the spores instead of seeds as their organ of propagation. That means they grow by means of the spores instead of the seeds. And they are also the organisms which are true land plants. That means from where the true land plants originate. That is the kind of organisms which the Teradophytes are. Now why they are called the true land plants? The reason is because they have the vascular bundles. Unlike the algae and the bryophytes are amphibians of the plant kingdom, but still they are growing in almost very humid and near the water source because they need water for fertilization. Teradophytes also need water for fertilization, and they also prefer to grow in the moist and shady places. For this reason they have a restricted geographical you can say that is your spread in this earth. So but they are true land plants in the sense that they are growing in the land. Very few species of Teradophytes belong to the aquatic conditions. It's not that the Teradophytes are not aquatic. There is one Teradophytes called Salvinia, which is aquatic, which is growing in water. So they are the water ferns. Azolla is there. Azolla is a water fern. But those are few, those are rare, those are exceptions. And the others are the true land plants. The reason is because they have the vascular bundles. Now they have both xylem as well as the phloem, but they lack the all components of xylem and all components of phloem. That means the xylem's four components, that is your xylem parenchyma, xylem sclerenchyma, tracheids and trachea. Out of these four components, they do not have trachea or vessels. Similarly, as far as the phloem is concerned, in case of phloem, the four components which are there, phloem parenchyma, phloem fibers, sieve tubes and that of companion cells, the Teradophytes lack the sieve tubes and companion cells. They have only sieve cells. Okay, so that is the difference between the other land plants like that of your angiosperms. In case of gymnosperms also, most of the gymnosperms have the vascular bundles which lack the vessels in case of your xylem component, and which lacks the sieve tubes and companion cells in case of the phloem component. They have sieve cells rather, but there are certain advanced species of gymnosperms in which the vessels are there. Primitive type of vessels are found, that is a xylem component, as well as they do have sometimes the companion cells in the advanced gymnosperms, from which scientists are thinking that maybe the present day forms of angiosperms might have arisen. So Teradophytes, true land plants because they are the vascular plants. They are also known as your Tracheophyta. Okay, they belong to a division which is also known as your Tracheophyta. Now the Teradophytes can be broadly called as or divided as that of your horsetails or that of your ferns. Now horsetails, why they are called as horsetails is the reason because their spores, that is the spore bearing organs, that the foliage which bears the spores, they form a compact cone like structure. We call them as your strobili, and that is very common in case of your equisetum or in case of your Selaginella, which looks like that of the tip of the horse tail. So that's why they have been named like that of the horse tails. And ferns are very common. You might have seen them around you growing in that is almost everywhere, and they of course prefer to grow in the damp and the moist places, including the bricks which are damp. In that also sometimes you will find that some hanging ferns are growing, which we call it as your adiantum or the maidenhair fern. So ferns and that is your Teradophytes and bryophytes. Again, if we want to have a difference between them, is that in case of bryophytes we have seen that the plant body is mainly gametophytic. That means it is haploid. Whereas if you see the Teradophytes, the plant body is sporophytic. Okay, the plant body in case of Teradophytes is sporophytic, and the sporophyte is independent and it grows and after that is when it attains the maturity, it undergoes the process of meiosis, resulting into formation of spores. Now in case of pteridophytes, mostly the species of the pteridophytes show homosporous condition. That means the spores are same type, they are identical. You cannot differentiate the spores into male spores and female spores or like that. So they are mostly homosporous. But there are certain exceptions in which like Selaginella, in which we can find that the spores are of two types. They are called heterosporus. One is micro and one is the macro, you can say. And when these spores are formed as a result of if you see this alternation of generation or the life cycle of the pteridophytes, so when the sporophyte undergoes meiosis to result into formation of the gametes. Okay, now these gametes or the spores are haploid, and these spores, when they will fall into the suitable moist ground or shady places, they will germinate into that is your structure which is called as your gametophyte. That's male gametophyte and female gametophyte. Sometimes this male gametophyte and female gametophyte is present within the sporophyte itself. So in those cases, scientists are of the opinion that they are the precursors of the seed habit of the higher plants. In case of seed habit, what happens? If you think about angiosperms, what happens? That is when the pollen will fall into the stigma, fertilization will take place, resulting to the formation of the zygote and resulting to formation of the endosperm, and it is present within the sporophytic plant body, and that results into formation of seed. That seed bears the embryo and the endosperm, isn't it? So same kind of habit we can see in case of the pteridophytes also, that the gametophytes which are formed that are actually present within the sporophytic plant body, and the antheridia and the oogonium, as it is called as your archegonium. So when the antheridia will be producing the anthrozoids which are flagellated, they need water for again traveling towards the archegonium containing the egg cell in the venter, and when the fertilization will take place, it will result into formation of zygote. That is, syngamy will take place, gametogenesis takes place, then syngamy results into formation of the zygote. Now this zygote is again a diploid and it will be producing the sporophytic plant body. So the sporophytic plant body again can be dependent upon the gametophyte for some reason. They can grow from there and then they can have their independent existence. Now this gametophyte which is formed as a result of meiosis, and that results into the formation of that sporophyte within this, that gametophyte in case of pteridophytes is known as your prothallus. If you remember in that is your bryophytes, we have seen that it is called the protonema, the primary protonema, then it transforms into secondary protonema, and from there that is your sporophytic organism begins its journey. So in case of this pteridophytes, it is called as your prothallus. So prothallus is the characteristic feature of that of the pteridophytes. Now all these events which just now I have told about, that is the formation of the gametophyte, then the gametophyte is dependent upon the sporophyte, and that seed-like precursor or whatever it is. Now if you divide the life cycle of the pteridophytes into the gametophytic generation and that of the sporophytic generation, then you will see that the gametophytic generation and the sporophytic generation is almost equal. Okay, they are equal. That means the life cycle of pteridophytes is having equal importance for the gametophytic generation. This red indicates the gametophytic generation, and it is also having equal importance for the sporophytic generation. So such kind of alternation of generation, last day I told you, it is seen in case of bryophytes also. We call that to be the haplodiplontic type of alternation of generation. But there is a difference. What is the difference? In case of bryophytes, it was the gametophytic plant body which was dominant compared to that of the sporophytic plant body, and sporophyte was although it had its existence, but it was parasitic on that of the gametophyte. But here in case of pteridophytes, the sporophyte is not parasitic on the gametophyte. The sporophyte has its individual existence, and the plant body in case of the pteridophytes is your sporophyte, not a gametophyte. But plant body in case of bryophytes was your gametophytic plant body. That means archigoniophore, you remember, bearing the archigonium, anthridiophore bearing the anthridium, and so there was a male plant separately and female plant separately, isn't it? But here you see the sporophytic plant body is the plant body from which the gametes are formed, and as a result of this meiosis the gametophytes are formed. These gametophytes are present within the sporophyte, and that will result into a seed-like habit in the near future for the organisms like gymnosperms and the angiosperms. That means there is an evolutionary trend, you can say, that how did the seed-like habit has arisen in case of the higher plants like gymnosperms and the angiosperms. Okay, so since here the primary body is sporophytic, so instead of writing the haplodiplontic type of alternation of generation in case of the pteridophytes, we can say it to be the diplohaplontic type of alternation of generation. This same figure you are going to draw it for the bryophytes also for alternation of generation, and this same figure is for the pteridophytes also for alternation of generation. But what is the difference is that here the plant body is gametophytic, but in case of pteridophytes the plant body is sporophytic. So since it is sporophytic plant body, gametophyte is dependent upon the sporophyte, so we can call this type of alternation of generation to be diplohaplontic type of alternation generation, and for the bryophytes we can say it to be haplodiplontic type of alternation of generation. Okay, so this is about your pteridophytes. Economic importance of pteridophytes are comparatively more than that of the bryophytes. Now, what are the economic importance of the pteridophytes? The economic importance of the pteridophytes includes that, of course, they bind the soil, so that's one of the common thing with that of the bryophytes and the pteridophytes. Other thing is that these plants are very, attractive to look at, so they are the ornamental plants, garden plants. They are mostly grown in home, in pots or in garden to make it a decorative piece. So that's the economic importance of pteridophytes. Some of the pteridophytes are edible, like for example Dryopteris. So Dryopteris is used as a vegetable by the people. They can be used as fodder. Then some species of pteridophytes like that of your Lycopodium. Now Lycopodium is a plant as a pteridophyte which has some medicinal properties, which you might have also heard about in the homeopathic applications. So that is also one of the, you can say, the economic importance of the pteridophytes. So these are the basic economic importance of the pteridophytes, and of course some fossilized form of the pteridophytes of the primitive history forms the fossil fuels in case of the when they are fossilized, they can be used as a fuel. So that's also one of the economic importance of the pteridophytes. So with this we have completed the pteridophytes. Now we will take upon the gymnosperms. Now gymnosperms and angiosperms, they are called phanerogams. Now why they are called phanerogams? Because they produce seeds. They also produce seeds, they also produce seeds. Then what is the basic difference? The difference is that in case of gymnosperms, the seed is exposed, seed is open, it is naked, it is not surrounded by any kind of fruit wall. Whereas if you consider the angiosperms, true flowering plants, they have the seeds which is present within the ovary, within the fruit. Okay, so that is a basic difference between gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymnosperms, are very less if you consider in terms of plant population. Only 900 species are available on this earth about the gymnosperms, and these gymnosperms are sometimes of various, habits. That means you can find some gymnosperms which are small heighted, like if you see cycas. And then if you can consider some gymnosperms which are the tallest plants in this world, sequoia, red sequoia is the tallest living plant. Some of the species of the gymnosperms are considered to be the living fossil. That means, what do you mean by this term living fossil? Those organisms which have changed very little from the time of its formation till date, we call those organisms to be living fossils. So they can be studied in their exact way how they first originated on this earth. So one such organism is ginkgo, okay, Ginkgo biloba. So that is you can say one of the important organism belonging to the gymnosperms. Gymnosperms produce softwoods. Okay, so they are used for making plyboards, they are used for making packing boxes. Gymnosperms are having various kinds of adaptations in them. The gymnosperms are generally having adaptations in which we can find that they have leaves which are reduced to that of spines, or you can say needle like structures, as we see in case of pinus tree. And that is because they are generally found in the mountainous region, where the temperate region, and where the water is available in the form of snow. So they are heavily cuticularized. So that is also the various kinds of adaptation found in the gymnospermic plants. They have the vascular bundles. I told you that they have the that is the tracheids, they have the they have the xylem parenchyma, they have the xylem sclerenchyma, and some primitive form of vessels are found in some species of the gymnosperms. In case of gymnosperms, there is one organism or one plant of gymnosperm which we call it as your gnetum. Okay, what is it called? It is called as your gnetum, Gnetum. Now this gnetum is although a gymnosperm, but it has various angiospermic characters. Now what is this angiospermic characters? We have told in the beginning that gymnosperms are flowerless plants, but if you see the gnetum, in case of gnetum, the inflorescence resembles somewhat the primitive form of the angiosperms. They have the female part of the that is the flower, which is present within a structure which is called cupule. So it gives a kind of formation of inflorescence, which is a characteristic features of angiosperms. Economically, these are very important. As I told you, they form the plyboard, they form the packing boxes. Gymnosperms, certain species are there that is which the seeds of this gymnospermic plants like pinus plant species, which when roasted can be eaten as some dry fruits like chilgozas we call them. Then sometimes these plants are provided with a kind of secretion which we call it as raisins. Now these raisins are waterproof and termite proof. So from them we can get the terpene oil, which is used in the paints and the varnishes to make our furniture insect resistant or water resistant. So the ambers, which is a kind of we are using it as a gem for making ornaments, that is actually the fossilized form of the raisins of the pinus of the primitive history. So that is the various kinds of, you can say, economic importance of the gymnosperms. Along with the various things which has been discussed, there are certain nitrogen fixing organisms found associated with the roots of certain gymnospermic plants. Like we can find Mycorrhizae. What is this Mycorrhizae? Mycorrhizae is a fungal association with that of the roots of certain gymnospermic plants like pinus. So the pinus trees roots are associated with some fungus which is intimate association resulting into the nitrogen fixation for the plant. So this kind of association is known as your mycorrhiza. Myco word means fungus and rhiza means the root. So when the roots of the plants like the gymnospermic plants is associated with the fungal component, so that it is able to fix the nitrogen and make it supply to the plant, then we call this type of association to be a mycorrhizal association. Similarly, there is a plant called cycas in case of gymnosperms, which is where we can find corolloid roots. Now corolloid roots are what? This appears to be like that of corals. We have seen the corals under the ocean, so how they appear, the structure somewhat looks like that, so that is why they have been named as your corolloid roots. So they have certain nitrogen fixing cyanobacteria associated with them. So that is also, you can say, a economic importance of these organisms, that means they enrich the soil, maintain the soil fertility by the help of organisms like that of the cyanobacteria or like that of the fungus. When it is fungus, it is mycorrhiza, and when it is your cyanobacteria, it is the corolloid roots, as we see in case of the cycas. Okay, now as far as the plant goes, the plant body is of course sporophytic, and the maximum lifespan of these organisms is occupied by the sporophytic generation. The gametophyte is only restricted to the formation of pollens, or restricted to the formation of the ovum, and they do not bear flowers. They have some specialized leaf-like structures, which is common in case of pteridophytes also, that pteridophytes have fronds in which they have the spores covered by a membranous covering, which is called indusium in case of pteridophytes. But in case of gymnosperms, they have woody leafy structures in which the female, that is your gametophyte, and the male gametophyte are located, and they form a structure which is a condensed structure around a central axis. We call it as a cone. That is the male cone and the female cone, and the leaf-like structure which bears this male cone, the male gametophyte and the female gametophyte, they are called the sporophylls. Okay, megasporophylls and microsporophylls. So they form this compact woody structure. We can see them very nicely in case of cycas plant. We can see them in case of pinus plants. And as far as the female gametophyte is concerned, it, unlike the angiosperms, which has the female part of the flower is having what? It is having stigma, it is having style, and then it is having the ovary. But in case of gymnosperms, it does not have those stigma and style. It is directly having the ovary, inside which the ovum is there, functional ovum is there. And also one of the difference between that of the gymnosperms and the angiosperms embryonic development is that in case of angiosperms, if you remember, we have read it in class 10 that they show double fertilization and triple fusion, that is the endosperm is triploid. But in case of gymnosperm, the endosperm is haploid. So in case of gymnosperms, the endosperm is haploid, and this endosperm is formed prior to that of the fertilization of the ovum by the help of the pollen. Okay, and the pollen is disseminated by that of the wind, that is wind is the pollinating agent. And when the pollen falls into the micropylar end directly, it germinates there, and the pollen tube is produced, and it is consisting of the male that is a male gamete, which will be fusing with that of the female gamete, resulting into the formation of the zygote. In case of gymnosperms, polyembryony is noticed. Now, what is this polyembryony? It means many embryos are formed inside the embryo sac. Okay, so embryo sac, many embryos are formed. So the male pollen tube containing the male gamete can go and fertilize. Many can go instantly and can get fertilized with the other cells, other potential cells found within the embryo sac, and that will result into formation of so many embryos inside the embryo sac. Now, this polyembryony is found in case of angiosperms, but it is not so common. It is restricted to certain families only. But gymnosperms, mostly the gymnosperms show the polyembryonic conditions. So that is the difference between the angiosperms and the gymnosperms. The process of fertilization, endosperm, as I told you, is haploid and it is formed before fertilization. But in case of angiosperms, if you remember, one of the male gamete fertilizes with that of the basal egg cell to form the that is the zygote, and the other one will go and fertilize with the central polar nuclei, central two haploid polar nuclei, resulting in the formation of triploid endosperm. So that is a basic difference between that of the gymnosperms and angiosperms. Now, this is the life cycle of the gymnospermic plants, where we can see that the sporophytic generation, or the sporophytic plant body is sporophytic, and when the gametes they fuse with each other, syngamy takes place, it results into zygote. The zygote develops into the sporophytic plant body, which is depending upon the habit of the plant, that whether the plant is small heighted or the plant is big heighted, it will be growing like that. And then after the plant has reached its maturity, it will undergo meiosis, resulting into formation of two types of gametes in two different types of cones, that is male cone and female cone, having the various types of megasporophyll and microsporophylls, and that will result into formation of gametophyte. The gametophyte is dependent. on the sporophyte. It does not have its individual existence. Same here also. In case of angiosperms also, the gametophyte is present within the sporophytic plant body. Okay, so seed habit is starting from that of your gymnosperms, but seed habit had its precursors in some of the members of that of the pteridophytes. So you can say that this, from evolutionary point of view, the pteridophytes are, certain pteridophytes, advanced pteridophytes are the precursors of the seed habit in case of gymnosperms and in case of the angiosperms. Okay, so this type of alternation of generation, in which the maximum life cycle is occupied by the sporophytic generation, we call it to be the diplontic type of alternation of generation, and the gametophyte is only this much, which is restricted to that of the sporophytic plant body itself. It does not has its own individual existence. So with that, we had come to the end of this chapter, that is the plant kingdom, in which we had studied about the thallophyta, that is algae, different types, bryophytes, pteridophytes and gymnosperms. And angiosperms, I have given you much idea about it, but as it has been excluded, so I am not individually dealing with the angiosperms. And regarding the alternation of generation, the algae shows the haplontic type of alternation of generation. That means the main plant body is haploid and the diploid phase is only restricted to just the formation of the zygote. The zygote is you can say the parasitic in on the body, on the gametophytic plant body, derives its nutrition from them, as we have seen in case of the bryophytes also. And so that kind of alternation of generation, in which the main life cycle is occupied by the gametophytic plant body, we call that to be the haplontic type of alternation of generation. And bryophytes, it is haplodiplontic type of alternation of generation. That means half of the part is occupied by separate independent gametophytic plant body, half is occupied by the sporophytic plant body. But in case of bryophytes, the sporophyte is dependent upon the gametophyte, so that is called haplodiplontic type of alternation of generation. And pteridophytes, today we have seen that in case of pteridophytes also, they have 50% of their life cycle occupied by the gametophytic and the 50% by the sporophytic plant body. But in this case, this main plant body is sporophytic and the gametophyte is having dependent upon that of the sporophyte, so we call it as your diplohaplontic type of alternation of generation. And finally, in case of the gymnosperms and angiosperms, the main plant body, the main, you can say, the life cycle is occupied by the sporophytic generation, and the gametophyte is only restricted to the formation of pollen or that of the ovum, and it is entirely present or within the that is your sporophytic plant body. So we call it to be the diplontic type of alternation of generation. Okay, so that's all for today's class. Thank you.